And now, John Swallow, who's been a friend of mine when he first ran for the legislature, I was invited to go up in a home in Pepperwood and meet him for the first time, for which I'm very grateful. And when he was elected, sitting in the gallery down at the house, John said, remember that? So I went down and sat by him on the floor of the Utah House of Representatives. Then I watched as things developed and his great wife and the strength. He became a bishop. And then he was elected to be Utah's Attorney General. And almost, what was it, a month after the attacks began, some of our liberal friends went after him with a bunch of lies, caused him to have to leave office just to protect himself. And I was able, and what it took a couple of years before they brought it to court, right? And just up here in the courthouse, I think I went to 6 or 8 of the court sessions, and as I sat there looking at that, and I remember I looked at the prosecuting attorneys and I thought, how weak is this? How incredibly weak is this, what they were saying and what they were trying to do? I got nothing. He was completely exonerated for everything. So it's been a blessing for me to know John Swallow and ask him to come up, and he wanted to share some words about what happened, because victory at long last. Too bad it took so much. So John, please.
Thank you, Dave, and good morning to everybody. It's been a very uplifting and enriching morning. And as I look out and see people I know, my heart is warmed at my associations over the years. I was elected the Attorney General. I loved every minute I served. And on the morning of my inaugural, which was on January 7th, 2013, it was one of the greatest days of my professional life. And as I took the oath of office, I felt a power and a spirit come over me that was not mine, but it was the power of God, as I felt the responsibility and weight of being chosen by the people to stand for constitutional principles in our government. And it was a morning I'll never forget. 5 short days later, on January 12th, 2013, the first horrific false accusations front page story hit. And I remember getting up early that morning because I was told it was going to come out, and reading the front page article in the Salt Lake Tribune on my way in to an Eagle Forum conference that morning, where I uttered a few words that became so meaningful to me later as I read about them several times in the press thereafter. When I told a story about Gail Ruzicka from the podium that morning, and how I had seen her in a sandy parking lot of a Smith's grocery store, throwing a couple of bottles of water into her outdated Suburban, having served in the legislature for several years and watching this remarkable woman exhaustingly do everything she could to fight for families and for the moral principles upon which our government was founded. And I thought at that moment, as I saw her there late in the evening, and I knew she was exhausted, that this woman undoubtedly is going to be going to the celestial kingdom. And I said that morning. And I was ridiculed, and I've been ridiculed several times in the press for saying that. But Gail, I want you to know that as firmly as I ever have, I believe that. God bless you for what you've done to protect us in our state and in our country. And I just think we owe her something special this morning. And I want to start out with this. and Scott and the others who presented, and David and his family. And I've been involved in politics for at least 25 years and have always respected and admired the Jorgensens, and could tell you many more stories, but we're not here today. Time is almost up to go into all the things I would love to share with you. And so I thought, yes, I did prevail. At every single level, I did prevail. And I was hoping I would, because I knew the truth. But that's not always what prevails in the short term. Truth always prevails in the long term, but not always in the short term. And so there were times when we wondered what our future was going to be because of all of the investigations and all of the allegations that arose because I was a threat. Because people knew that I knew, and people knew that I couldn't be controlled, and they knew that I would be very effective, and not because of me. And I want you to know that this is not about me, and it's not about you. It's about us. And it's about a war and a fight that started probably worlds ago. And it's the fight between agency and freedom on the one hand, and compulsion and force on the other hand. And that's what the fight is all about. And so, yes, I prevailed. And I'd love to share just a couple little things that would be very interesting to you before I talk about the freedom gene. So first I want to share a couple of things that I think are magnificent. Yes, they came after me in the county, and they charged me with 13 felonies for corruption. Are you kidding me? And I know that they thought that if they spent enough money and if they looked hard enough at about any person, they would find enough to convict someone on. And so they felt pretty safe. And I've got to tell you, I believe that I am probably the most investigated person in the history of the state of Utah. And as I listen to the presentation about what they can tell about people, what they can mine from you, I'm shocked that they didn't find enough to convict me of something. But they didn't, not even a misdemeanor. This jury of 8 people who didn't know me from Adam listened to 4 weeks of testimony and considered 9 remaining felonies and a misdemeanor or 2. And Senator Lyle Hilliard, one of the senior members of the state Senate in Utah, just a few weeks ago, when they were considering reimbursing my family for the expenses, which they did, $1.5 million, what a great day that was. I wish it were going to my retirement fund, but it's going to my good lawyers who really protected me and gave me and my family the ability to move forward. And we're moving forward, and we're just thrilled to death and grateful for that opportunity. But here's what he said. He said to his fellow members of the Senate, he said, look, when a person is charged with this many crimes, if a jury believes he's guilty of anything, they find a way to get him. Even if it's just on a misdemeanor, they find a way if they think you're guilty. And I thought that was profound because that's exactly how I feel. I thought with just because I believe in the covenants I've made as a person, that I was the cleanest person up there. And it turns out that maybe I was. That just maybe, possibly I was. No pride in that, because every one of you here, if you had the same opportunities and privileges and responsibilities that I enjoyed, would have not done anything wrong either, because that's how we're built. We're good people who try to do what's right, but they chose the wrong person. And I'm so grateful that I hadn't done the things that they counted on that I had done, and I'm grateful that a Heavenly Father protected me and my family through that process, so that even though we hadn't done what they said we'd done, that we weren't convicted anyway. Because that was my biggest fear, because I've been in politics. And I remember once when I was running for the state legislature, when a chairman of a legislative district said to me, when I asked, well, why did we lose a delegate in your precinct? He said to me, well, we kind of felt bad for the other guy, so we gave you 2 and we gave 1 to the other guy. And I was worried that would happen in my trial, that they'd say, well, you know, the prosecution's worked pretty hard on this case. We'll just throw a felony to them and we'll call it square. And that was the big fear that I had. But it didn't happen. I was acquitted, right? But then the Federal Elections Commission came after me. I mean, I want you to know something. The government lusted after me. They threw everything they had against our family. And I know that your faith and prayers and the things you talked about made a difference to support us. But here's what happened in the federal elections case. Here's what the judge said when that thing was over. He said, it is hereby ordered, adjudged, and decreed, and this is a federal district court, Judge Benson in Utah, that defendant John Swallow's motion to dismiss is granted. And then he said this, it is further ordered, adjudged, and decreed that the Federal Election Commission is forthwith enjoined from enforcing Regulation 11 CFR Section 110B 4B13 and ordered to strike such regulation from the Code of Federal Regulations. What that means in non-legal parlance is that they had been enforcing an illegal rule and terrorizing people in this country under that illegal rule for 30 years. And because they came after me on that rule, and because we challenged it effectively, that rule was wiped out from the books. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that. And finally, the last thing I wanted to share about this, and I won't be long, David, I promise, was some people had a question. Yes, you've been acquitted. Yes, you beat the feds in their federal lawsuit against you. But what about the ethics? Weren't you unethical? And so I wanted to share with you something else that happened after my criminal trial. You see, there were bar complaints filed against me as a lawyer, 3. And all 3 were thoroughly investigated by the state bar. The state bar's responsibility is to police the ethics of those that they regulate, which are the lawyers. And here's what they said at the end. We have looked at all the reports, all the investigations, all the evidence that was submitted in your trial, and here's what they said. We have determined upon consideration of all factors that at this point in time, there is insufficient evidence to demonstrate that you violated any of the rules of professional conduct. Therefore, we have determined to decline to prosecute in this matter and close our file. Now, I want you to know what that means to me, is that not only was I not guilty, but I was innocent of even ethical concerns. But what does that mean to all of us? And here's what I say. If they can do what they tried to do to the sitting attorney general of a state, of a sovereign state, who out there is safe from what the government can do to you? And that is a scary thought. And that is why I want to stand and thank the founding fathers of our nation who had the wisdom and the inspiration to form a union under a constitutional republic. Because without that Constitution that we talk about everywhere, I would not be standing here today because the people in power wanted to destroy my life and stop me from ever having a voice again. And it was only my right to a jury trial under our Constitution that saved and preserved and protected me from total destruction and a life in prison and a reputation that could never be redeemed. And that is what it means to have a Constitution. And that today, my friends, is what I'm grateful for. Now in closing, I just want to say this, and I had a lot to say, and I'm not going to say it. I believe that there is something called, I say I have 5 more minutes, there's something called a freedom gene. Have you ever seen the movie Casablanca? If you have, please raise your hand. I love that movie. In that movie, there's a scene in the bar where the Germans are there and they're singing their national anthem with vigor. And they're trying, and that represents symbolically the control of the force of the other side, of socialism and dictatorship, right? But in the middle of that song, the Free French who were there, they didn't want that happening, and they stood up with the band playing, and they sang their national anthem. And the camera zeroes in on one of the women who's kind of leading the group, singing their anthem with tears streaming down her face because she had what I call the freedom gene. What is the freedom gene? If I asked all of you to stand up right now, and I won't, and I asked you to shove your neighbor and see what happened, and you did, what would your neighbor do back? He'd shove you back because you won't be pushed around. And I won't be pushed around because I have the freedom gene. And just like in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker had the Force in concentration. There are differing levels, I believe, of the freedom gene in all of us in America. But I believe that you here in this room have an abundance of the freedom gene, and so do I. And so do the founding fathers of our country. They had the freedom gene that gave them the courage to stand up and take great risk with their personal fortunes and their lives and their liberties because they believed in something more powerful than themselves. And so I say to all of you here this morning, when you could be watching, I won't say that, but when you could be doing other things, maybe taking care of the yard or something, right? Maybe it's good that you're here because you're not taking care of the yard, which you wouldn't want to be doing. My hat is off to you. And there's work that we can do. And there are 3 things that we need to do, and I can tell these in the last minute, to make sure we're protected as much as possible. Because if you want to stand up in this world and fight for freedom, you're going to be targeted. There'll be a target on your back. Gail, there's a target on your back. David, there's a target on your back. Kathy Smith, there's a target on your back. And there's a target on my back, and there was. But there were 3 things that helped me get through it. Number 1, I didn't do it. I call it the Nike opposite. I'm writing a book about this. If you're going to be an influencer, you have to be good because you're going to have a target on you. Don't do it. Number 2, you got to prepare. You got to be prepared. And I like to tell the story of Chesley Schellenberger, who was the pilot of the U.S. Airways flight that landed on the river. He, for 42 years, was a pilot. He was a glider. He had all this training and preparation. And here's what he said as he was asked about how he was ready. He said this, and I want to share it with you because preparation for us is important. He said, one way of looking at this might be that for 42 years as a pilot, I've been making small, regular deposits in this bank of experience, education, and training. And on January 15th, the balance in my preparation account was sufficient so that I could make a very large withdrawal. And everyone on that plane was grateful for that preparation. And I know that through my life experience of trying to do the right thing and preparing myself as a lawyer in other ways, I was prepared to get through that experience. And finally, you gotta have the courage of your convictions. These Revolutionary War heroes, these patriots, they had the courage of their convictions. Fortunately, my wife and I had the courage of our convictions not to take the plea deal that was offered because we hadn't done it and we wanted to see it through. And I'm eternally grateful for that decision. It takes courage. And it will take courage for you to stand up and fight for what you believe in when the chips are down. I want to thank you for being here. We have things we've got to do. The war between liberty and agency and compulsion and tyranny is just getting started. And we're going to fix it in these groups, but we're also going to fix it in our families and with our grandchildren as we are examples, because I'm LDS, I'm a Latter-day Saint, and I believe my prophet is inspired by God, and he's told us we need to fix our families, and we need to be personally connected to the Holy Spirit so we'll be ready when the time comes. I think that's the best thing we can do besides the work that we're doing. God bless you all. I'm thankful to be here with you, and let's continue forward. Thank you.